So these are our steps in MUS sampling. And remember, these are sort of similar, laid out similarly to those attribute sampling steps in Chapter 8. So first off, you have to determine the objective, which, okay, we're trying to test some kind of an assertion for a financial statement account. And I was saying kind of most commonly it's AR existence. That was certainly what I most commonly saw in practice. But you can test other things with this. So your book talks about other examples, like you can test things like inventory valuation and things like that. So it's not exclusively AR existence. That is just the most common one and the one I tended to see in practice. So first off, we define the population. So for MUS, the population is really the book value of the account balance you're testing. So earlier we were talking about the inventory account balance, or it could be the AR account balance, etc. All right, the sampling unit in this case is each individual dollar. And the misstatement, which is like the deviation and the TOC, so the misstatement will be the difference between the book value and value actually supported by my audit evidence, which we keep calling the audit value. The next step is determining my sample size using these 4 inputs that we talked about earlier. So remember, this is going to be a little bit of a change, even though this is based on attribute sampling theory, which doesn't typically use population size. Population size will come into play when we use MUS. And population size will have a direct impact on sample size. And if you think about it, this makes a lot of sense. If my account balance is bigger, the more material it is, the larger my sample is going to be. If my account balance is very small, kind of makes sense that I would have a smaller sample, right? I'm going to get to do less work. My account balance is gigantic, probably means I'm going to have to do more work, right? Going to have a bigger sample. So this one makes a lot of logical sense with this direct relationship. Okay, another quick question. So take a pause. All right, so this is another one of these ones where you have to think through all the directional things. So when using sampling techniques for substantive tests, sample size increases as ... and it's this guy. I won't spend too much time explaining that one because I think you all get it. So then we select our sample items. That is our next step. And we select our sample items using probability proportional to size selection. And we actually use a selection technique which very much is going to look like the systematic selection that we went through in Chapter 8. And if you recall, when we did the systematic selection, we had kind of a series of steps we went through. And the very first step was calculating the sampling interval by dividing the book value of the population by the sample size. So to go through an example, if the company, let's say we're auditing AR, if the book value of AR is 2.5 million and we have a sample size of 93, then the sampling interval is just 2.5 mil divided by the 93, or 26,882. So 26,882 is going to be my sampling interval. And remember this sort of second step here, after I calculate my sampling interval, you think back to when we learned systematic selection. After you calculate your sampling interval, you randomly pick a number in the first sampling interval, right? Pick number in first SI to be your first sample item. So what that means here is I'm going to pick a number between 1 and 26,882. And we said, okay, yeah, you run like a random number generator between 1 and 26,882. And in this case, in this example, your random number generator is going to give you 3977. So what that means in this context is dollar number 3,977 will be your first sample item. And then remember, the deal with systematic selection is I keep adding the sampling interval to figure out each additional item that I have to test. So I take 3,977 and I add again the sampling interval 26,882 and I get 30,859. So this is going to be the second dollar that I test. Then again I add 26,882 and I get 57,741. So this is going to be item number 3 or dollar number 3 selected for testing. And so on and so on and so on. I keep adding the sampling interval until I get $93 or 93 items for testing. And in terms of what's going on here with this whole chart, let's discuss that too. So the way this is laid out is you have all your AR accounts listed down here, right? These are all my accounts that are making up AR. They're just listed in numerical order from account number, which is fine. Any way of listing them, like numerical order or alphabetical order, is fine. I would not list them in any order that would bias your sample. So an order that would bias your sample would be something like listing them in ascending order, descending order of balance. That would be a problem. But something like alphabetical order shouldn't matter. So this balance column, this represents how much each customer owes your audit client as of the balance sheet date, right? As of the date you're testing. So ACE owes $23,050. Admington owes $15,495, so on and so forth. And their total AR balance is our $2.5 million. This cumulative dollars column is kind of the key here, and it confuses some people, so I want to discuss it slowly. So I apologize if you're already way ahead and understand the cumulative dollars column, but it always trips some people up, so I'm going to just take a minute. Okay, so the cumulative dollars column is basically like a running total of the dollars in AR as you go through these accounts. So ACE Emergency Center, because their balance is $23.50, if you're looking at the running total of dollars in AR, their balance covers dollars 1 through $23.50, right? 1 through $23.50. So cumulative dollars at this point is only $23.50. If we look at Admington Hospital, their balance is going to cover dollars $23.51 to $17,845. Right? Their actual balance is $15,495. So we add the $15,495 to the $23.50 to get the $17,845. And these are going to be the actual dollars that they have in the sample. So when we pick a sample item like $3,977, what that means is we have picked 3,977 in the running total or cumulative dollars, right? So in terms of ACE Emergency Center, we did not pick a dollar in them at all, so they are not going to be tested at all. The first dollar we picked was really in here, right, between the $23.50 and the $17,845, and so that is part of Admington Hospital's balance, $23.51 to $17,845. So that's why this cumulative dollars is so kind of important for figuring out which sample items you've selected. Another good way to visualize it is to think of AR as, so this column kind of represents my AR total. It starts at 0 and it ends at 2.5 million. And then within my AR balance, I have all these little account balances making it up, right? And when you add up all these individual account balances, they're going to wind up adding to the 2.5 million. So basically you pick the dollar in this balance or you pick a dollar in this balance. So this represents my customer A, this represents my customer B, C, D, and E. So this is customer F, which has a huge balance. And this is customer G, customer H, right? So this next point here is what I want to illustrate. So it says each individual dollar in the population has an equal chance of being selected. Yeah, we already talked about that. But items or logical units, which is account balances, greater than the interval, sampling interval, will always be selected, okay? So any account balances that are bigger than the sampling interval will always be selected. This is a rule of MUS. This will happen by default. This is something that a lot of people struggle to understand. If it already makes sense to you, feel free to skip the next few minutes. So basically, the reason why account balances bigger than the sampling interval are going to get picked by default is, okay, because if you have a sampling interval, right, that is going like this, you can see, obviously, right, how a lot of these balances are completely getting skipped over. So customer E here got completely skipped over. Customer G got completely skipped over. Customer B got completely skipped over. All those were smaller than the sampling interval, right? The sampling interval is each hop here. But customer F, which is greater than the sampling interval, has to get selected by default. He's bigger than the sampling interval, so because the sampling interval is just going down one notch at a time, it is going to land on customer F by default. There's no way out but through customer F, right? So customer F is absolutely going to be selected. And this will happen anytime you have a customer balance or logical unit, right? I say logical unit because you're not always going to be testing AR. So whenever you have an account balance bigger than your sampling interval, this will happen. So by default, those items are going to be selected. So I once had a student that sort of compared this to frogs and lily pads. So he was like, all right, we have like all these lily pads of different sizes, right? And then you have a frog, and so I'm going to draw my little frog. Frog can only hop 2 feet or whatever. Frog is our sampling interval. Lily pads are our customer accounts. So in this case, because the frog can only leap so far in each leap, right? He can only leap 2 feet. Any lily pad that is wider than 2 feet, such as this one, he is forced to land on. But any lily pad that is smaller than 2 feet, he might skip over it, right? We don't know. He may land on it, he may skip over it, we don't know. But any lily pad wider than 2 feet, he's forced to land on it because he can only leap by 2 foot intervals, okay? So same concept, that's it. So that's another one that people really struggle with, and it's kind of a random concept that winds up showing up in questions a lot. So it's a good one to feel confident about understanding.